Hi, my name is Ryan, and I work for Lamp Magazine. This is Lamp Reviews. Today I'm reviewing this book, Tales of the Unreal, Volume Number 1, published by Unreal Press. Warning, this video contains spoilers. Unreal Press holds a very special place in my heart, and I consider them to be torchbearers in a very special movement of authorhood and publisherships, founded online and gently settling itself in print. They are representative of what I might call a lit renaissance, a burgeoning golden age of some very new and exciting, if at times blunt, cutting edges. The hands of the clock have come to this point, and Unreal Press is telling the time. This is their first publication of Horror, a horror anthology. And now that I've finished it, I will say that I'm looking forward to another, quite so. I'm very proud of these guys, but I won't say any more about that since I'm here to review the book. And check it out! The first thing I notice is the size, pocketbook format. Yes, this is my favorite format. I publish my work in this format. Just look. How nice is that? You get it. You see. I can tell that this book was published via KDP, 4 1/4 by about 6 4/5. Garamond typeface, pretty sure. The interior formatting and editing is bang up, and the reverse includes a very Archie comic elemental advertisement for a book, Eggplant by Ogden Nesber. I'm scheduled to review Eggplant very soon. This book comprises stories from a lucky 13 different writers, most of them authors of other works that I've read or will read. So without further ado, I'd like to jump right in. The first story is Traffic Stop by Zulu Alitspa. This story is an appropriate introduction to the book, the series, and as such, by extension, the Unreal Press themselves. Alitspa is one of my favorite new authors because he's very prolific and his progress outshines all other writers associated with Unreal, I believe. My experience in publishing brought me into contact with Alitspa some years back, and his output has exploded and taken form in a very impressive refinement and substantial growth. Alitspa reminds me of that type of student forged for greatness, and I've seen it happen. Unstoppable, almost exponential advancement in skill. I have a feeling he might be the first of us to compose a comprehensive Pomo door stopper, something big and dumb and hopefully fun. Traffic Stop entails the dire unraveling of one Trevor Fletch, our poor Trevor Fletch. Trevor Fletch is the type of man for simple pleasures, country driving in his minivan, a warm breeze in his face, small delights, like claiming quiet ownership over municipal hedges, his own tiny kingdom. And on his normal course, Trevor encounters the abnormal, a horror indeed. This story is funny. It employs some very basic Kafka-esque elements, dare I say, to a comic effect, a comedic horror, if you will. Trevor is pulled over by a nameless officer of the law, an event that will guarantee his inevitable undoing. This cop knows about Trevor. He's been watching him. He's got plans for Trevor. I like this part, where Trevor apologized to the cop, triggering him hard. Trevor's descent into captivity comes in small, aching increments. It's what I consider a literary finger trap. Every move the character makes tightens the noose. I also really like the part where the police officer beats the shit out of Trevor, slamming the door on his leg and then racks the pistol and puts it in his face. That's funny. The ending made me laugh as I was left wondering where poor Trevor's can of cola was instead of considering his impending torture and death. This part is funny too, when the cop so uncertainly puts Trevor under arrest. You have the right to remain silent? I'm not in love with Alitspa's prose here, but I will say that after several readings, it suffices for the story. I might nitpick, like for example, instead of the brake squealed and Trevor flew forward too quickly to stop himself, but he tried anyway and felt his wrist crack when his hand folded awkwardly beneath his slender body. I might instead say, the brake squealed and Trevor flew forward, too fast to stop himself, cracking his wrist and folding his hand beneath his body. This story is important to the book, the trailhead to further reading. Our very first foray, you might say. It would be remiss to overlook this work. There may be other small examples of stilt that is very negligible. I said the technicality in context of this author is coming up, and I know he can demonstrate better prose than this, which from Traffic Stop hence he has. Though this tale does mark an effective gateway into Tales of the Unreal, and as such earned the green. It's good. It's absurd, it's dire, it's funny, and it doesn't take itself too seriously, which, when considering the craftsmanship, is good enough. Make us proud, Zulu. The second story in Tales is The Collapse of HMS Mariana by Daniel Gavrilovsky. A very twisted tale of the eventual demise of the titular seafaring vessel from the tip of South Africa to the island of Bahamas. And I like this story a lot. Mariana is quite worthy of mainstream publication, in my humble opinion, and represents the finest type of contribution to this anthology. A very well-written, well-conceived story. Very well done. Here we have one Mr. Nelson, assistant cook to the absent or otherwise drunk chef, as he deals with the repercussions of some inexplicable and enigmatic rot that spoils their rations, devours the ship, and mortally wounds grown seamen. He struggles to make sense as things become worse and winds up a direct witness to the horror at sea. This story is very funny. It's written using some fun archaic verbiage and is composed as an epistolary. In this case, Mr. Nelson's journaled record. Love it. The funniest part to me is that the ship was quite well equipped with supplies and our narrator was quite well the man for the job. Alas, I liked watching them dwindle down to hardtack. The whole ordeal truly melts into madness the further we read, and by the end I found a very psychedelic, very intense horror. This line still makes me shudder. All alone now, my belly gargled. I became so weak that I sicked up the whole bird on the planks, already a lumpy sludge. I see now. Mariana is vengeful. She refuses us our portions. The food rots faster than we can digest it. Pretty crazy, man. I really love Gawlowski's prose. 10 out of 10. In my experience, this kind of composition is reflective of what I used to describe as anonymous postmodern, where the writer flexes in English to an impressive degree before deconstructing the language and experimenting. Gawlowski begins it here. September 21st, 84 BC. How can I grow these Indian sticks? I have acquainted myself with the deck and its miscreants. These foul, foul people, the whole ship reeks of death. It's a lot of fun. I like to imagine cursed waters. The ocean is scary. Maybe the ship sailed into a weird bacterial pollutant or something. Maybe it goes deeper. The Bermuda Triangle would have been on the ship's course, just saying, and they would likely have sailed it, perhaps eventually, or on the planned voyage, just saying. I've heard other readers tell me that they consider it a plot hole that the crew might dine on such extravagant food or that it might have such extravagant storage. The stores of food aboard Mariana were typical for a mid-19th century vessel going halfway around the world. Furthermore, the food description aspects were part of the humor and helped demonstrate the contrast between expectation and outcome. I did find a typo right here. This is both the author's fault and the editor's fault, but because neither of them can justly be said to be truly guilty of anything, all parties are absolved. I know how these things work. This story was worth the price of admission for the entire anthology. This story alone will secure a win for the whole book. Bad stories, and by extension bad writing, can only get so bad, limited by the bottom. But for good stories, for good writing, the sky is the limit. There is, in fact, a pretty clear demarcation between what I would consider an amateur and a pro. Collapse of the HMS Mariana crosses this threshold. It's great, and therefore worthy of the blue. I'm absolutely stoked to have read this story, and I will read it often, guaranteed. This is exactly why platforms like Unreal Press are doing fundamental work. I'm now obsessed with Daniel Gawlowski and will eagerly pursue his work. The third story in this anthology is Twin Candles by Miles McNaughton. Okay, goosebumps. That's what this is. This story is goosebumps. And actually, that's not a bad thing. It's pretty on par in terms of storytelling. We meet the McGrew family, and I like the McGrew family. I used to read a fucking lot of Goosebumps, and I know Goosebumps. When I read Goosebumps, this is Goosebumps. It's comfy for me, actually, and I think the subgenre could use a little exploration. The plot has to involve young kids, teens, getting spooked, being a kid, talking like a kid, trying awkwardly to relate to the reader. Twin Candles has all of this. We, the readers, are witness to a haunting inside an old house atop a much-cursed swamp within which the accursed lurks about and pursues the resident caretaker, some poor dude who almost gets carjacked by a ghost on a dirt road. A classic motif. Of course, now the McGrews are coming. Younger sister bear Charlie gets spooked by the same spirit while doing her thing. In my mind, even though McNaughton's description puts the spirit in a green robe, my headcanon is such that the dude on the book's cover is the Twin Candles ghost. Especially because of McNaughton's aside feature directly under the ghoul. Goosebumps. Oh yeah, and then older brother Bear Bowie is a classic piece of shit human and even precariously packs a fucking gun on a fishing trip with Papa Bear. I was sort of waiting for Bowie to pull the piece on his dad or some shit, but it didn't happen. He did see our spirit, the dual flame, eyes in the dark, and he did fall off the boat, and Dad did save his ass. I assume he'll have to drain his metal. This story is split into IV parts. The last part is our climax, and apparently the poor McGrews are all unconscious, which is such a goosebumps way to go out. Unconscious. I actually expected McNaughton to kill them in the end, but he did the right thing. He knows better. The prose here is not very good. It was tough to read the first time through. It's very slow and not aptly described, I think. The second time I read it, I digested the story and I had some fun. That's when I got the nostalgia. But the first time was a bit of a chore. Basically, McNaughton is telling, not showing, the whole time. I mean, it's just part of his prose. She shoved her foot into the throttle and watched horrified as the RPMs flew through the roof, but the truck went nowhere. I might say as the needle bounced and the engine flared, though the truck went nowhere. Maybe mentioning the RPM specifically and then using a figurative statement like through the roof reads too colloquially for me. Consider this. She went up to the netting and took a panorama picture, then grabbed a few selfies in various poses. Again, we're referring directly to a panorama picture and then using the term grabbed to describe photographs. It's just kind of goosebumpsy in my opinion. I might sooner say she went up to the netting and spun herself slowly, her arms extended, the camera clicking and snapping. Anyway, I had a lot of fun reviewing this, if at all for the fond memories associated with the subgenre. I think it would be satisfying to see McNaughton conquer this subgenre. I'd like that. I'd like to see him try again. Twin Candles is not bad. It has earned the yellow. A writer like this is fun to read because I can tell there's an earnest ambition for quality, if perhaps yet grounded by technical prowess. Yeah. And as the case with any and all writers, especially developing writers, skill grows with practice. Can't stop, won't stop. To be honest, I'll be looking forward to McNaughton's work on volume number 2. The fourth story of Unreal Press's Tales of the Unreal volume number 1 is KGB Agents from Beyond the Stars by James Craik. James Craik is an interesting writer to me because his ideas outpace his execution, yet his output is solid. And insofar as a decently prolific author of science fiction, fantasy, and other future tech subs, he's made an impression on this book and at Unreal Press. This story is just about tied for the longest entry in the anthology, along with the previous story, I believe. Here we have KGB Agents, Craik's very own Francis Ford Coppola meets Twilight Zone era George R.R. Martin. As I mentioned, there's no lack of storytelling here. The story itself draws mostly from the tactical and survivalist banter of several desperate war-torn soldiers, disguised as Soviet officers and penetrating what I believe to be Kamchatka. Men are dying, damn it! There's a mysterious spirit on the lam strangling our heroes. Here our primary arc pertains to the sterling serious Sergeant Hardy, his Private Allen, and a man named Freeman, a privateer or something. They haul out to no man's land for some recon and relaxation and end up among mad hijinks, such as, but not limited to, roadside assistance, wintry jungle pursuits, some collateral damage, some death, and more and more. Craik has a decent penchant for linear storytelling, and I enjoyed the action of this story. I like this part. He snatched up the rest of the fuel cans and jumped in the back again as the others threw themselves into the cabin. The engine sputtered to life, and for a moment Hardy was afraid they'd poured in moonshine. Then the diesel started firing and the wheels started spinning. That's pretty Craik. I dig that. A lot of them end up chain smoking in order to even sort of see the ghost, which was pretty funny. I was never really anxious or scared reading it, which is okay. I definitely expected all these poor fuckers to die at the end, so I'm glad that happened. I always appreciate the very classic trope in the final conclusion. Cause of death for the 5 Americans was filed in the Lubyanka as inexplicable suicide. Good times. I look forward to reading more of this author because I know that he's prolific and has a voice for linear narrative and dialogue. I believe Craik's prose could be improved, and I know that it very likely is. As I've mentioned, he continues to write. One of the things he does that I disapprove of is the word then. I don't like when the narrator uses the word then. That's just me. I also see a lot of telling as opposed to showing in Craik's writing. I don't care for his prose very much here, but interestingly enough, it doesn't really get in the way of the storytelling. I did read it twice, and the second time did yield more detail, but not as much as you might expect, so I believe it's easy enough to read. It's about a 6.5 on the Flesch Kincaid, as far as I can tell. Pretty normal. This might be an example of telling. Freeman kicked his door and jumped out from the Zis 5. I might sooner have one of the characters tell us about the specific type of vehicle, the Zis 5. rather than the narrator do it in an action scene. Narration in KGB is third omni. The narration also interjects commentary, seemingly primarily from Hardy's perspective. Let me read you something. Alan and Hardy followed quick enough, the sun setting behind them and ending an all too short day of travel. The luminous orb seemed to have been hugging the horizon like it was loath to loom over the trees and quick to vanish back to night. A tiny fraction of the day was given over to the sun, and the lines share to night and to ice. Creeping freeze would encroach on all things that moved. Already at 8 from the shore of the river inn, it lapped at the hull of a barge hardly big enough to haul cows, coating the sides and encasing the ropes. I might instead say Allen and Hardy followed Freeman, the sun setting behind them on a short day, too short to travel. The open white hole in the sky hugged the horizon and turned to yellow, vanishing into the dark. Most of the day would be given up to night and ice. The freeze crept in and ate from the shore of the river and bit at the iron hull of some deserted barge. The captain rubbed his eyes and followed the frost across the vessel and up the ropes. It was hardly big enough to haul cows. Maybe don't mention that it's hardly big enough to haul cows since it literally has cows on it, but the characters don't even know that yet. All in all, pretty fun to read. Still kind of goosebumpsy to me. Maybe sort of Sanderson-y. By that, maybe I just mean YA. Reads a little like YA. KGB Agents from Beyond the Stars is not bad. The yellow. The story here was good, and I believe Craig's voice will refine with practice, and he trains a lot. So I expect improvement. His ideas are fun to explore, and I'm going to read James Craig actually coming up here, so I'm excited to see what he puts his poor characters through. Our fifth story is The Branca by L.A. Labuschagne. This one is trippy. Here we have the Branca, a tribe of self-similar people of the jungle, people of hands and feet. White people sent to the trees to fuck and run, and there's nobody left to fuck, I guess. I was looking forward to cracking the mystery of who the Branca were. I thought maybe they were feral Australians or hybrids from Timor. But the writer spoiled it for me, and it turns out they're spawn of some deserters spooked by the nuclear blast of a requisitioned South African warship. All right. They came from somewhere else when the sun was set on fire. Now only in the jungle's shade could they survive. A pair of sisters, or otherwise fellow Branca females, become accosted by some sallow types. And the older of the pair gets lasered to death after she spears one of the bad guys in the guts. Sweet. These men are prize hunters, mercs, apparently for the government of Congo or some authority otherwise located in Kinshasa. They consider doing bad things. The men draw us through a little exposition while they discern the remaining Branca's flesh value. But she plugs the Chinese ex-military soon enough that the last man standing can work out a very anime-inspired happy ending where the scalper, whose latest ambition in his blood-soaked career was increasing the size of the war that he was fighting, saves the day, gets the girl. The story is absurd, and it's not well written. Read this. With her Branca face, just two black eyes under a muddy gray bark, she stared ahead, through the undergrowth, down at the mulch floor. I just might not mention with her Branca face. So now I know you want me to picture her face, but with her face, she stared ahead. It's telling, it's not showing. The prose is very amateur in its execution. Maria ignored her. What she didn't ignore was the forest floor and its footprints. Yeah. It's crafted well enough to not have entirely destroyed the story. It's readable. It maintains its tense, at least. She could feel the sweat on her brow already, greasy as it mixed into her mud paint, and the string felt far worse. It cut like bone knives into her rangy shoulders, carving flaky lines into the only clothing she wore. That's not bad. That's pretty good, actually. The opinionated narrator is, of course, annoying, but... Okay, this is the literary analog of this kind of drawing. As far as short stories go, the Branca is not bad. Sure, I might categorize the story as less than okay, but not bad. It's not very good. If Labuschagne was any worse off with his prose, he might have earned the red. I didn't really love the story. The praying to the sun motif and the final passage at the end of the sun answering her prayers was the essence of the story, in which I found the most redeeming value. The dialogue was okay. I know that Labuschagne is a hitter on the scene, and he deserves my respect. I don't love the story, but I do respect his effort, and that has gone a long way into keeping him out of the red. Good job. You can do better. The sixth story is The Silver Pasture by Guy Hayes. This story starts off strong. Old man Raymond Williams, still shell-shocked, going through his pervy old man thing at the restaurant. That was fun. Then the talking maggot showed up on the broccoli. Why? To berate old Ray and send him into an episode, but of course, why not? To which he most ultimately succumbs. Poor guy. Though still lucid throughout his death and even into his own autopsy, his narrative remains. Pretty gnar. At least the maggots were delicious. Maybe that's what caused him to die. I don't know. This story is a pretty stupid tale that even leans on a campy punchline conclusion like some cursed off-brand children's cartoon. Too weird. This is too weird for the kids. This tale marks the part of the book where I say, okay, Hayes, I see maybe what you did here. Here we have a very cheap ride. A very cheap ride that goes up around once and I go, whee! I see what you did here. I think what's more is that I see what you didn't do. Harder to put my finger on. The nut you busted on me, the reader, was like not very pleasant. The overall flavor, my reaction, always blinking and confused. But I went on the ride and I got my picture taken. Actually, that's it. If Tales of the Unreal were a ride, this would be the part where your photograph is taken. I actually read the story 3 times, and 3 times I got the same wad in my face. I'll probably read it again much later in life and enjoy it more for old time's sake than for its writing, but the Silver Pasture does enjoy some redemption from its stupidity. It's not terribly written. The prose actually isn't awful, and the story is campy and strung together just enough, in the shape of a tent, just enough to take pitiful shelter therein, and I beg of you, Hayes, smarten up. I'm just kidding. I don't think you were trying to reinvent anything here, so I commend you for building this tent. I stood here, and all I got was this t-shirt. This story is sort of an anti-mascot to McNaughton's spirit, maybe, the little maggot dancing on the broccoli. The story is also an important part of the book, as it marks a very careful shift, a reference point, a landmark on the path that is this anthology. From here we have the best and the worst. Okay, not bad. Yellow. Next. The 7th story is Vestigal by Sophus. I believe it's pronounced Vestigal. This story is interesting to me because it's hard to read. It's difficult, nor is it fun. Your prose, my guy. What is the story about, my guy? Here we have a homeless bum getting a beat down and maybe dying and traversing timelines and perhaps universes for a little while, taking the form of a monster wanderer through the realmscape. He comes back to life and eventually wakes up in a hospital just to leave and get warped by some bug and trapped in somebody's body? The final scene is so fucked I might as well quote it. Years later, he finds himself in a bizarre domestic life of something else's choosing and stares at his son, who might be the last thing he can love, and when it stares up at him with child's love and bright green eyes starting to tinge fungal white and says, "Dada," he screams and cannot stop. This writing takes itself very seriously. There are enormous clarity issues here, mostly a caustic purple. Prose so unclear, so poor that I tried to read it thrice and faltered, the volume to my side. You see this book's unruly and bent pages? It was the work of Sophus. There might be some tense issues here. It's in third omnipresent, though this sentence might be past. Empty-headed, empty-stomached. Though I think it's just clarity. It's so purple that the writer might very well get away with claiming poetry. Check it out. Naked black trees adorned in flocks of dangling shoes, ragged under stripes of ashen snow, made gauze-like in the few red tears of sunset which streak through the fog. You tell me. Tears, maybe. Tears. I don't want to rewrite any of it just so that I could prove a point. It's not good at almost every part, and I'm not sure what vestigal means. Maybe a variation of vestigial. Maybe a portmanteau of vagina and testicle. Something I will say in defense of this story is that the writer definitely has a vision, and that's fundamental to being a better writer. I would read Sophus again. I want to see where this goes. Sophus, my man, read some Hemingway. When your description is so overwrought and unclear, it confounds the pacing and spreads tiny moments over disproportionate intervals of consideration. I recommend Hemingway because it's on the opposite side of what you're doing. If you really want something more florid, try Heart of Darkness or, Frankenstein. I always say Frankenstein. Get into that. Flexing grammatically is much more impressive than just reaching for adjectives. Don't get me wrong, I appreciate the effort. A figurative A for effort. But Vestigal's real final grade in real life is an objective red card. Not good. Sorry. Next. The 8th story is called Ajar by Alex Prestia. Prestia? Are you out there? Are you safe? This story is very bad. Oof, red. Okay, the red. All right. Whew. This is unreadable. Check out this opener. Ajar. The door slightly ajar. Oh, how Claire loved the jumping, tumbling, slowly springing of a word. Ajar. Immediately we have contradictory tenses. I don't know whose fault the hyphen is, but you're looking for an M dash. This is autistic. This is autistic. The author of this story is trying to channel what little Nabokov he's read, I think. I'm guessing the first 2 pages of Lolita. Poor Claire, our story's only character. I think she's an old lady tripping out to some Alzheimer's and facing her younger/older self. It's just very badly written, very clunky and crudely connected English, a sort of stream of consciousness that wants to maybe be quirky, but is most definitely not quirky. It's very cringy. It's not horror, it's horrible. And the only redeeming quality to the story is that it's very short. So for that, I will show mercy and move forward. The 9th story in this anthology is Not My Problem by Wenyu. The idea behind the story might have worked if the author was a little more clever. The basic premise? Endnotes. Ooh, endnotes! The endnotes in Not My Problem aren't actually an extension of the narrative directly, but rather a kind of bibliography of funded study publishings and journal essays that sort of interject the primary story to, I don't know, give us a laugh or maybe extend context. The idea might be neat, but Wenyu doesn't really let it become neat. He just does the thing. I wanted maybe some fake articles or deeper rabbit holes or even links that made sense. Here he gives us this comment about the EMTs that are rescuing him. Let those EMT assholes carry him out. Make them work for their money. And the corresponding endnote brings me to this, Office of Tax Analysis Working Papers and Technical Papers. And I read a bit of this to try and see if it was going to make more sense in a wider scope, but no, it's just a rando commando article vaguely about taxes contextualizing the previously quoted prose. Wenyu is trying to be clever by linking some tax document to the comment, saying to us, "Heh, I pay your taxes, you have to save me." It's not well done. It's ham-fisted and kind of uncreative after the first one, but just endnotes to unrelated articles that sort of fulfill immature tropes. Poor. The author here is clearly trying to sound like DFW, but it's not happening. I admire the inspiration DFW has on people. You used the word futilely. No, 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 no. Oh yeah, the primary story here deals with Louis, whose motivations, I will admit, escape me. He has borrowed his friend Raoul's car. He definitely crashes it, but who cares? For some reason, it's not his problem. That's not funny. Here's a tense error. As the car rolled back into the road, a car flew past on his left. And then later, whack, 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 slapping his cheeks to stay alert. Okay, it has an appropriate ending. This story wasted more of my time proportionate to its overall payoff than any other story in the book. And for that reason, I'm out. Not My Problem gets the red, and that sort of is my problem now. The 10th story is Railroad Boys by Jalen Hart. Why do bad writers always seem to make stories for children and sort of miss that mark even? Is it because they've never read anything outside YA Goislop? I couldn't really blame them if that's the case. Perhaps that is the case with Hart. Perhaps he just never read anything else that inspired him to write. Here we have kind of a diet Tom Sawyer, the Railroad Boys. They're trying to profit, you know, kid, come on. They get on a train, but it's no ordinary train. They apparently very quickly develop into grown drifters. The stiff-haired boy becomes the stiff-haired man, and they forget themselves. Our main character, Osip, by the very end of the story, now a roving marauder and murderer. Check this out. A glitched smile. Nope. Here you're telling rather than showing me. Daniel made a noise that showed he was satisfied with that answer. And here is some more telling. One of the men shot the girl in the face, and the ginger tried to scream but couldn't. His last breath was a struggle. I might try to describe what happened instead of just telling me what happened. For you, Hart, I recommend reading Clive Barker. Let's say The Great and Secret Show, a Percy fave of mine. I think he's doing what you're trying to do, and it's very easy to read. It's not hard to do. Clive Barker isn't really great or anything, but he's obviously way better than you, so there's your homework. I'm sorry, but the Railroad Boys is in the red zone. You're offsides, Hart. To the penalty box until the required reading is complete. Thank you. The 11th story is The Nuclear Man by Joshua Vitullo. This story deals with a lone traveler, a dutiful man in a dark world. He pushes the cart across the wasteland, an epic delivery. But for what? His story unravels parallel to his own life. Hope slowly dwindling, despair mounting all around. He's been poisoned. The radiation, it's the nuclear man. You got it. He dies doing his job. It's pretty sweet. There is a lot of monologue here, first person. The self-reflection is pretty great. Dig this. It's no use making wishes, since I've not been a child in many years, but I'd prefer to be driving that unwieldy weight I left behind, all the way back home on this cart instead of carrying this excruciating pain in my stomach, which despite its emptiness feels heavy enough to threaten to sink below my groin. That could maybe use a little cleanup, take out the threatened part. You get it. It's not perfect, but it's fun to read. The tense shifting might be intentional as a mechanism to deliver us the character's final death. It might not. It sort of works because in my head it's kind of a mental journal. So at some points the nuclear man is reflecting and sometimes he's narrating the moment. I'm not sure if Vitalo does this conscientiously, but whatever. Otherwise the prose is acceptable. I like how the character deals with his own demise, almost politely dying. I like the story. It's fun enough to read. I read it twice. It's not terribly exciting or captivating, but a sort of banal wasting away, a boring dystopia. I will grant the nuclear man the green because I'll probably read it again. That's all I have here. Well done. The 12th story is Unbound by David Harrod. This is the second last story in the book, and I'm going to say right away that it's in the green zone, baby. This is the story of a man who becomes obsessed by a book, the inconclusive contents of which torture him and scare him straight. The subject of this mysterious tome, Jean Bouchard, an adventurer and writer whose final leaves of truth have blown away to the winds of history. It perfectly represents itself. It's short, and it is sweet. I love it. It's totally a fucking metaphor for the book as a whole, and in a wider scope by extension a metaphor for self-publishing and perhaps Unreal Press itself. There is a very palatable letters from the editor flavor here. Harrod's prose. It is ample and woven well. It reads dramatically, but the purpose is suited. He isn't feigning desperately to emulate something classic. He's comfortable here. It's a little wordy, but it's in the style, just enough to be fluid and funny. I like his description of Bouchard's amazing prose, trademark. My palms sweat through age-soured paper as the story grew in its derangement, and I experienced in livid detail the author's fall to alcoholism, depression, and unspeakable depravities of flesh and soul, sanity slipping as he violated sexual and cannibalistic mores in pages of flourishing prose, crooked personal notes made in margins overgrown to dominate entire pages, and hastily drawn diagrams of what appeared to be interlocking lunar, human, and baboon man life cycles. That is a lot of fun. Read this for me. A stronger man would have thrown the hateful book into a fire that very moment. And yet M. Bouchard's world lived in me. I had bitten deep enough to cut my lips on the barbs of a stolen June plum seed, seen bodies drawn burning in sunlight over the bloodletting stone, and tasted man-flesh raw and wet down the sides of my lips before my brothers and I threw our knees high at wild midnight fire dances. Pretty sweet. All this and more I had lived, and I languished in it all, in his cruelty towards me, unfinished, unresolved, unkind to an audience who indulged his selfish whims, acted as willing pupils to his every word until at the promise of finality we were abandoned. I will not lead another living soul astray to this haunting absence of finality. Come on, tell me that's not fun. That's a lot of fun. I read this a few times just for fun. It's funny how at the end he makes a plea to his reader to only endeavor works that are complete. That says something about writing and publishing itself, like I said. I like this story. I like this writer. Good job. The last story is Vacai by Ogden Nesmer. A barren and dismal station, this lost locale. Melner works in the duty of some land survey, some deep secret operation, perhaps reconnaissance, perhaps never mind if you want to keep your job about it. He draws our narrative into a character drama, which I think is Nesmer's most comfortable paradigm. After Melner is betrayed and his stack of personal journals go missing, he has an emotional meltdown and takes a nasty fall and ends up in the hospital, hilariously injuring a nurse and eventually running into the Vacai itself, shot at, destined for emptiness and death, I believe. Nesmer's characters are fun, And I like his writing. His prose is decent. He's a reliable writer. What I like about Nesmer is his overall voice. He's a good storyteller. That, coupled with his ability to stay out of his own way, I think is the reason why Nesmer is the darling of the lit Renaissance. He's solid enough that his output reflects the total state of the art, the generalization of a movement, a microcosm. This story stressed me out. The cold tones, the dismal drudgery, the impersonality. It was not very scary, but it does evoke a sort of anxiety that perhaps speaks to an essential theme for Nesmer here. That feeling of being lost, a deep fear of open, empty spaces, and is dumped into the void. It reminds me of a certain nightmare that I used to have where I was just floating, but the contrast between myself and anything else was so stark, so stressfully different, like a horse through the eye of a needle. That's how I felt reading Vacai. It is an appropriate end to the volume. Nesmer's voice is the local authority on what it takes to cut the right story from the right rock, a very apt contribution to Tales, during the conclusion of which Nesmer lends his own brand of wasteland bleakness. Check this out. The gun cracks again, and a faint voice is yelling for Melner to stop. Stop, but he's sliding too fast. The fog doesn't abate. It gets thicker and thicker, and his leg twists the wrong way. He screams, and he's picking up speed. The gun's cracking is sucked away until it's lost somewhere in the abyss above him. Everything is soon lost, reduced to rhythmic pounding on his numbed and twisted body. It's white with nothing, and the only thing stringing Melner to reality is the pain pouring up from his leg, until that, like everything, fades into nothing. That final word, nothing. What can I say? I love it. It's not a terrible surprise that Nesmer can easily earn the green. Vacai is good. This is my challenge to Nesmer, to really challenge himself to produce something great. I think that is what is yet to be. Now, granted, his latest novel, I Pray to the Hungry Gods, I have not yet read. So I'm not in any position really to be making any demands of him. I appreciate the reliability. And every author will always relish the opportunity to write another book, a better book. I dig this story, and I'll dig it again, no problem. And I'm proud of the editors of the Unreal Press for recognizing Nesmer as the trustworthy exit portal from the murky beyonds of this very strange foray into pulp fiction. This book is good, and Tales of the Unreal Volume Number 1 is deserving of the green. It's a very appropriate debut for Lamp Reviews. I'm stoked to have killed your darlings for you, and I'm very satisfied that the book is not a piece of shit. I'm going to submit some work to Unreal Press for Tales Volume 2. Yes, I am. Thank you to every one of you involved in this book. Well done for showing up. You are my inspiration now. Talk soon.